Highway 36, Denver, 8:47 a.m. A silver Mercedes flips twice, bursts into flames. Inside, a young woman, trapped, unconscious, bleeding, gasoline pooling, fire spreading fast. Michael Harrison has 30 seconds, maybe less. His choice? Drive away safe to his 8-year-old daughter, or crawl into a burning car for a complete stranger. He chose courage. What he didn't know, that stranger would change his entire world, because sometimes one moment of heroism doesn't just save a life, it reveals a destiny no one saw coming. This is that story. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The screech of tires on wet asphalt cut through the morning air like a blade. Michael Harrison gripped his steering wheel tighter as the silver Mercedes ahead of him suddenly swerved violently to the left. A deer bounded across Highway 36, disappearing into the tree line as quickly as it had appeared. But the luxury car wasn't so lucky. Time slowed to a crawl as Michael watched the Mercedes lose control on the rain-slicked road. The vehicle spun sideways, tires smoking against the asphalt, before careening off the highway and slamming into the concrete barrier with a sound that would haunt Michael's dreams for months. Metal twisted, glass exploded. The car flipped once, twice, before landing upright in a mangled heap. Michael's Ford pickup skidded to a stop on the shoulder. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, fingers fumbling with the emergency dial. 911. What's your emergency? There's been an accident on Highway 36, eastbound, about 2 miles past the Sterling Industries exit, Michael said, his voice surprisingly steady. Car hit the barrier, flipped multiple times. I can see someone inside. Sir, are you injured? No, but... Michael stopped mid-sentence. Smoke was beginning to rise from beneath the crumpled hood of the Mercedes. Sir, are you there? Michael ended the call and ran. Each step toward the wreckage felt like moving through quicksand. The closer he got, the worse it looked. The driver's side had taken the brunt of the impact, the door frame compressed inward like a tin can. Inside, a young woman, maybe 25, hung unconscious against her seatbelt. Blood trickled down her forehead from a gash near her hairline. Her left arm was bent at an angle that made Michael's stomach turn. Miss! Michael shouted, pulling at the driver's door handle. It wouldn't budge. Can you hear me? No response. Her breathing was shallow, labored. The smell hit him then. Gasoline. Sweet and sharp and terrifying. Michael looked down. Dark fluid was pooling beneath the vehicle, spreading outward like spilled ink. The engine made ominous clicking sounds, and small orange flames began to lick at the edges of the hood. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Michael stood frozen. He thought about Sophie. Love you to the moon, Daddy. And back again, sweetheart. Their morning goodbye echoed in his mind, Sophie with a rainbow backpack skipping toward the school entrance without a care in the world. Sophie, who'd already lost her mother to a brain aneurysm 2 years ago. Sophie, who would be completely alone if something happened to him. The flames grew larger. Michael ran back to his truck and grabbed the tire iron from behind his seat. Glass showered everywhere as he smashed the rear passenger window of the Mercedes. The sound of breaking glass mixed with the growing roar of fire under the hood. The heat hit him immediately as he crawled through the window frame. Smoke filled the interior, making his eyes water and his lungs burn. The woman's seatbelt was jammed, the metal clasp twisted from the impact. Michael pulled out his pocket knife, the last anniversary gift Catherine had given him before she died. His hands shook as he sawed through the thick fabric of the seatbelt, the blade catching and slipping with each desperate cut. Come on, come on. The flames were visible through the dashboard vents now, orange tongues of fire reaching toward the interior. His jacket sleeve caught fire, and he beat it out with his bleeding hands, never stopping his work on the seatbelt. The woman's head lolled to one side as the belt finally gave way. Michael caught her weight against his chest, her body limp and frighteningly still. Blood from her head wound soaked into his shirt as he dragged her toward the back seat. Getting her through the rear window was like trying to thread a needle while wearing boxing gloves. Michael's back scraped against jagged glass as he pulled her through, tearing through his shirt and skin. The front of the car was now fully engulfed in flames, and he could feel the heat blistering the skin on his neck and arms. They were 5 feet from the car when Michael heard it, a low whooshing sound that made his blood freeze. He threw himself forward, covering the woman's body with his own, just as the gas tank exploded. The force of the blast lifted them both off the ground. Michael felt debris rain down on his back, sharp pieces of metal and glass embedding themselves in his shoulders and arms. The heat was overwhelming, like standing too close to a furnace. When the ringing in his ears finally stopped, Michael found himself lying in the grass 10 feet from where the car had been. The woman was beneath him, still unconscious but breathing. He rolled off her carefully, his entire body screaming in pain. The Mercedes was nothing but a twisted skeleton of charred metal, flames still dancing among the wreckage. Michael pressed his jacket against the woman's head wound, his burned hands trembling with adrenaline and shock. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. "Help is coming. Just hold on." In the distance, sirens wailed. As Michael knelt there in the wet grass, his back on fire with pain and his hands raw with burns, he couldn't stop thinking about that morning, about dropping Sophie off at school, about how she'd looked back at him with that bright smile, completely trusting that her daddy would come home safe. What have I done? But then the woman stirred slightly, and Michael heard her whisper something so quiet he almost missed it. "Thank you." And somehow in that moment, he knew Catherine would have been proud. The paramedics found them like that. Michael hunched over the unconscious woman, talking to her softly, even though she couldn't hear him. His hands were a mess of burns and lacerations. Second-degree burns covered his back and arms, and blood seeped through his torn shirt from a dozen cuts. "Sir, you need to let us take a look at you," the paramedic said, a young man with kind eyes and steady hands. "Take care of her first," Michael insisted, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "She was trapped longer than me." "Sir, please." Michael's eyes never left the woman's face. "Make sure she's okay first." It took 3 paramedics to convince Michael to step back while they worked. As they loaded the woman into the ambulance, Michael caught a glimpse of her purse, scattered contents spilling onto the wet asphalt. A driver's license, credit cards, a photo of an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. The name on the license read, Olivia Sterling. Sterling, like Sterling Industries, where Michael had been working as a maintenance supervisor for the past 5 years. But the connection didn't register through the fog of shock and adrenaline. All that mattered was that she was breathing, that the paramedics were saying words like stable and responsive. "What's your name, sir?" the second paramedic asked as she cleaned the glass from Michael's hands. "Michael Harrison." "Well, Mr. Harrison, you saved her life, but you also nearly got yourself killed doing it. These burns are serious." Michael nodded absently, watching the ambulance pull away with Olivia inside. Only then did he allow himself to think about Sophie, about the phone call he'd have to make to his sister. How do you tell an 8-year-old that daddy might have scars for the rest of his life because he couldn't drive past a stranger in trouble? The emergency room at Denver General was a blur of activity. Michael sat on an examination table while Dr. Sarah Chen worked on his hands, carefully removing pieces of glass and debris from his palms and fingers. "You're lucky," she said, though her expression suggested she thought he was anything but. "The burns on your back are a 2nd degree, but they should heal without permanent damage to muscle function. Your hands, though, you're going to need surgery on 3 fingers. There's significant nerve damage." Michael watched her work, his mind elsewhere. "The woman from the accident, Olivia Sterling, she's alive because of you," Dr. Chen said firmly. "Skull fracture, broken arm, some internal bleeding, but nothing that won't heal. The fire department said you had maybe 30 seconds before that car became a death trap." 30 seconds. Michael closed his eyes and tried not to think about how many times in those 30 seconds he'd almost turned around and walked away. "Mr. Harrison?" Dr. Chen's voice was gentle. "Is there someone we can call? Family?" My sister, Maria, and my daughter's school, Sophie. She's 8. I was supposed to pick her up at 3:30. Michael's voice cracked. The medication was making everything feel distant and strange, but the thought of Sophie waiting for him at school brought everything into sharp focus. "We'll take care of that," Dr. Chan assured him. "But you're going to be here for a while. Surgery, observation, physical therapy. This isn't something you recover from in a day or two." Michael nodded, staring down at his bandaged hands. 2 weeks ago, the biggest worry in his life was whether he could afford to fix the water heater in his apartment. Now he was looking at medical bills that would probably cost more than he made in 6 months. But she's alive, he told himself. Olivia Sterling is alive. That had to be enough. Maria arrived 20 minutes later with Sophie in tow, her face pale with worry. "Uncle Mike!" Sophie launched herself at the hospital bed before Maria could stop her, then pulled up short when she saw the bandages covering her father's arms. "What happened to you?" Michael looked at his daughter, all freckles and worried brown eyes and tangled hair from the playground, and felt his heart break a little. How do you explain to a child that sometimes adults have to make choices between safety and doing what's right? "I helped someone who was hurt, sweetheart," he said simply. "But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." Sophie climbed carefully onto the bed beside him, avoiding his bandaged hands. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Michael admitted, because he'd learned after Catherine died that honesty was better than false comfort. But sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. "Like how you took care of me after Mommy went to heaven?" Michael's throat tightened. Sophie only talked about Catherine in whispers, usually late at night when the dreams were bad. Hearing her mention it so matter-of-factly was both heartbreaking and hopeful. "Yeah, baby, just like that." Maria squeezed his shoulder. "The school said you missed work. Have you called Roger yet?" Roger Bennett, his supervisor at Sterling Industries, a good man who'd been patient when Michael needed time off after Catherine's death, but patience had limits. Missing 2 weeks for medical recovery was one thing. Missing work because you'd nearly killed yourself saving a stranger was another. "I'll call him tomorrow," Michael said. "Right now, I just want to go home." But as he lay in that hospital bed, watching Sophie color pictures of superheroes she insisted looked like him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. Not just in his body, with the burns and cuts that would leave permanent scars, but in his understanding of who he was and what he was capable of. Catherine used to say that love meant showing up for people, even when it cost you everything. Michael had always thought she was talking about family, about the way you take care of your wife and daughter, no matter what. He'd never considered that sometimes love meant showing up for complete strangers. 2 weeks later, Michael was back at work, with his hands still bandaged and his movements slower than usual. The burns on his back had healed enough that he could wear his uniform shirt without too much discomfort, but gripping tools was still painful. He was fixing a heating unit in the executive wing of Sterling Industries when Roger Bennett found him. "Mike?" Roger's voice was strange, almost nervous. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you, in his office, now." Michael's stomach dropped. Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries. In 5 years of working there, Michael had never even been on the same floor as the man's office, let alone called to meet with him personally. "Is this about the time I missed?" Michael asked, already mentally calculating how much money they had saved and how long it might last if he lost his job. "Just go up there, Mike. Diane's expecting you." The executive elevator felt like the longest ride of Michael's life. The top floor of Sterling Industries was all marble and glass, with panoramic views of the Denver skyline and the mountains beyond. Michael had seen it in company newsletters, but being there in person was overwhelming. Diane, Mr. Sterling's assistant, smiled warmly at him. "Mr. Harrison, he's expecting you. Please, go right in." The office was larger than Michael's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, and expensive artwork lined the walls. Alexander Sterling stood by the window with his back turned, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and perfectly tailored suit. But it was the other person in the room who made Michael's breath catch in his throat.
The young woman from the accident sat in a wheelchair near Mr. Sterling's desk. Her arm was in a cast, and bandages were still visible on her forehead where Michael remembered seeing blood. But her eyes were alert and focused, and she was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She was crying. "Mr. Harrison?" Alexander Sterling turned from the window, and Michael could see that his eyes were red-rimmed with emotion. "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Olivia." The world tilted sideways. His daughter, the woman Michael had pulled from the burning car, the stranger he'd risked his life for, was Alexander Sterling's daughter. Olivia struggled to stand from her wheelchair, wobbling slightly on unsteady legs, and before anyone could stop her, she crossed the room and threw her good arm around Michael in a fierce hug. "You saved my life," she sobbed into his shoulder, her voice muffled by tears and emotion. "The doctor said I had less than 30 seconds before the fire reached the passenger compartment. They told me everything. Your injuries, your burns, how you shielded me from the explosion." Michael stood frozen, overwhelmed by the revelation and by the weight of her gratitude. All he could think about was that morning weeks ago, about how close he'd come to driving past the accident, about Sophie, about the choice between safety and courage. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. "No." Alexander Sterling's voice was thick with emotion as he approached them. "Mr. Harrison, Michael, I've spent the last weeks learning about you, about your wife, Catherine, about Sophie, about how you've worked here for 5 years without a single complaint, how you've never missed a day except when you were literally in the hospital because you saved my daughter's life." The older man placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, and Michael noticed that it was shaking slightly. "Mr. Harrison, Michael, I've built this company on the principle that good people deserve recognition. But what you did goes beyond anything I could have imagined. Olivia is my only child. I lost my wife Margaret 10 years ago to cancer, and Olivia is all I have left in this world." Olivia pulled back from the hug, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I've been having nightmares about being trapped in that car. The fire, the smoke, the feeling of not being able to move. But then I remember someone was there, talking to me, telling me I'd be okay. Even though I was unconscious, somehow I heard you."
"You told me thank you," Michael said suddenly. "Right before the paramedics came, you whispered thank you." "I remember that," Olivia said softly. "It was like hearing an angel." Alexander Sterling cleared his throat, composing himself. "Michael, I want to make some things clear. First, all of your medical expenses have been covered. Every penny. That's non-negotiable." Michael started to protest, but Alexander held up a hand. "Second, we are promoting you to facilities director. It comes with a substantial salary increase and benefits that will cover Sophie's health care and education through college." "Mr. Sterling, I can't—" "Third," Alexander continued, "Olivia has a request." Olivia smiled through her tears. "I've been working on my master's degree in child psychology. Before the accident, I was driving to a children's shelter to deliver books and spend time with kids who've lost parents. It's something I do every week." She paused, glancing at her father. "I'd like to meet Sophie. Not because I feel obligated to, but because I want to understand the kind of man who would risk leaving his daughter an orphan to save a stranger. I want to learn from both of you." Michael felt tears he didn't know he'd been holding back start to fall. She'd like that. Sophie would really like that. The first time Olivia came to dinner at their modest apartment, Sophie was so nervous she hid behind Michael's legs for the first 10 minutes. But Olivia had brought a bag full of art supplies and a book about superheroes, and within an hour, the two of them were sitting on the living room floor, coloring and laughing like old friends. "Mr. Mike," using the nickname Sophie had insisted she adopt, "you know what Sophie told me today?" Michael looked up from the kitchen, where he was attempting to cook spaghetti with his still healing hands. "What's that?" She said her mommy used to tell her that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they just have brave hearts. Michael's hands stilled on the pasta spoon. Catherine had said those exact words to Sophie during one of their bedtime conversations back when she was still alive to tuck their daughter in at night. She was right, Olivia continued. I used to think heroes were people in movies or books, but real heroes are people like you, people who show up when it matters. Sophie looked up from her coloring book. Olivia says she wants to help kids like me, kids whose mommies and daddies are in heaven. Is that right? Michael asked, bringing plates of spaghetti to the coffee table where they were sitting. My whole life, I've had everything I could ever want, money, education, opportunities, but I never really understood what it meant to be grateful until I woke up in that hospital and realized someone had risked everything to save me. She paused, twirling spaghetti around her fork with her good hand.
You didn't just save my life that day, Michael. You showed me what my life should be for, what it means to live in a way that's worthy of the sacrifice someone made for you. That night, after Olivia left and Sophie was asleep, Michael sat in his small kitchen and pulled Catherine's coffee mug from the cabinet where he'd kept it for 2 years. He'd never been able to bring himself to use it or put it away permanently. It had just sat there, a reminder of everything he'd lost. For the first time since Catherine died, Michael made himself a cup of coffee and drank from her mug. It didn't bring her back. Nothing ever would. But somehow, it felt like she was there with him, proud of the choice he'd made and the new family they were building from the ashes of their grief. 6 months later, Sterling Industries held its annual gala at the Denver Art Museum. Michael stood backstage in a rented tuxedo that Sophie had insisted made him look like James Bond, nervous sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. You ready for this, Daddy? Sophie asked, straightening his bow tie with 8-year-old seriousness. Not even a little bit, Michael admitted. Alexander Sterling had insisted on presenting Michael with the company's first annual Courage Award at the gala, in front of 500 employees, board members, and community leaders. Michael had tried to decline, but Olivia had given him a speech about the importance of recognizing real heroes in a world full of fake ones. It's not about you. It's about showing other people that ordinary individuals can do extraordinary things. That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. From the wings, Michael could hear Alexander's voice carrying across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this company was built on the principle that every person matters. Tonight, I want to tell you about a maintenance supervisor who exemplified that principle in the most extraordinary way. As Alexander began telling the story of the accident, Michael felt Sophie slip her small hand into his. Daddy, are you scared? Terrified, Michael said honestly. That's okay, said, with the wisdom that children sometimes possess. Heroes can be scared. That's what makes them brave. When Michael walked onto the stage, the entire room erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. But he only had eyes for Sophie, who was beaming with pride from the front row, and for the photo of Catherine he kept in his jacket pocket, the woman who taught him that love means showing up for others even when it costs everything. Alexander presented him with a crystal award engraved with the words, "For extraordinary courage in the service of others." But the real gift came in his speech. Michael Harrison represents the best of what Sterling Industries stands for, Alexander said. But more than that, he represents the best of what humanity can be. Tonight, we're establishing the Catherine Harrison Memorial Scholarship Fund for children who've lost parents, because Michael has taught us that when we take care of each other, we honor those we've lost. In the audience, Olivia wiped tears from her eyes. Over the past 6 months, she'd become more than just the woman Michael had saved. She'd become Sophie's honorary big sister, Michael's friend, and a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most beautiful connections. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and congratulated Michael, Olivia pulled him aside. You know what the hardest part of recovery was? What's that? knowing that someone risked everything for me when I was a complete stranger. It made me realize I needed to live a life worthy of that sacrifice. You didn't just save me from that car, Michael. You saved me from wasting my life on things that don't matter." She gestured towards Sophie, who was showing off her father's award to anyone who would listen. "Look at her. Look at how proud she is. You raised a daughter who thinks her daddy hung the moon. And you know what? She's right." Michael smiled, watching Sophie animatedly tell the story of his heroism to a captivated audience of adults. Catherine would have loved this. Not the attention or the award, but seeing Sophie so happy, seeing our family grow. "She would have been proud of you," Olivia said, "for the man you were that day on the highway, and for the man you've become since." 1 year later, Michael Harrison's life looked nothing like he could have imagined. He worked in a corner office as Vice President of Employee Welfare and Community Outreach, a position Alexander Sterling had created specifically for him. The job allowed him to identify and help employees facing hardships, to ensure that Sterling Industries lived up to its values, not just in policy, but in practice. Sophie thrived in a private school that Olivia had recommended, but more importantly, she'd found her smile again. The nightmares about losing her mother had faded, replaced by dreams about the future and the extended family that had grown around them. Every Thursday, Olivia came for dinner. Every Sunday, the three of them visited children's shelters and hospitals, reading stories and bringing art supplies. Sophie had decided she wanted to be a feelings doctor like Olivia when she grew up, so she could help kids who were sad. "People need hope," Sophie had explained with 8-year-old clarity, "and sometimes hope looks like someone who cares about you." On a quiet Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after the accident, Michael drove Sophie to school in the new car Alexander had insisted he accept. As they pulled up to the school entrance, Sophie turned to him with the same bright smile she'd had before Catherine died. "Love you to the moon, Daddy." "And back again, sweetheart." Michael watched her skip toward the school building, her rainbow backpack bouncing with each step, and felt Catherine's presence as strongly as if she were sitting in the passenger seat beside him. The scars on his hands and back had faded, but never disappeared. Permanent reminders that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected moments, that a single decision to help a stranger can change not just one life, but many. As Michael drove toward Sterling Industries, toward another day of work that felt more like a calling than a job, he thought about that moment on Highway 36, the choice between safety and courage, the 30 seconds that had redefined everything. He'd made that choice thinking only about saving one life. He had no idea he was also saving his own. Sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They just show up when it matters most. And sometimes, when you risk everything for a stranger, you discover that stranger was never really a stranger at all. She was family you just hadn't met yet. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because in a world that sometimes feels dark, we all need reminders that heroes walk among us. They're just wearing work clothes instead of capes. Subscribe to Everbell's stories for more tales of courage, love, and the unexpected connections that change everything. And remember, you never know when 30 seconds of courage might transform not just someone else's life, but your own.
But wait, I know what you're thinking. You've been watching Michael and Olivia's beautiful friendship unfold, seeing how perfectly they complement each other, how Sophie lights up whenever Olivia walks through their door. You've noticed those lingering glances, the way Olivia's voice softens when she talks about Michael's courage, the way Michael's entire face changes when Sophie lightens up when she sees Olivia. You're wondering if maybe, just maybe, this story of rescue and friendship could become something even more beautiful. Well, let me tell you something. Months after that gala, on a snowy December evening, when Olivia was reading bedtime stories to Sophie, something happened that changed everything again. A moment so tender, so unexpected, that it made Michael realize his heart was ready to love again. And Sophie? She had plans of her own. If you want to see how Michael and Olivia's love story unfolds, how a hero's courage led not just to saving a life, but to finding his soulmate, smash that like button and comment part 2 below. Because their journey from strangers to family to something even deeper is a story that will restore your faith in second chances and the magic of unexpected love. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next.